This is Robert Sungenis welcoming you to Robert Sungenis Live, this time for September 28th in the year 2022, the year of our Lord. So glad you could be with us tonight. As you know, this program is set aside for you to ask your questions, give your comments on any topic whatsoever. And I, as my role as host of this program, will endeavor to answer your questions to the best of my ability using our Catholic faith, scripture, tradition, the fathers, the medievals, the popes, the councils, the saints, the doctors, the catechisms, the encyclopedias, and just about anything I can find to help you walk away satisfied that your question has indeed been answered. We come to you every Wednesday from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And usually I have a topic that I want to cover at the front of the program. Tonight is an exception. No special topics, except we should pray for all those Christians who live down in Florida who are having a hard time right now. And we should pray that the Lord will protect them all, get them all to safety, and that this thing will blow over very quickly and things can be restored to normal. We were going to have E. Michael Jones on the program tonight, but unfortunately, we couldn't get prepared in time for tonight's show because I just got back from a long trip giving some lectures in Colorado. So we put it off to next week. So if you were hoping to see Michael Jones tonight, sorry about that. But definitely scheduled for October the 5th, which would be Wednesday next week. And if you weren't here last week, you know the program will be about Michael's new book, The Dangers of Beauty, talking about art from the time of the Greeks all the way to the present. Not only paintings, but sculpture and architecture and music and poetry and literature and even movies and fashion and theater and all that kind of stuff. What does it all mean? And Michael will be here to tell us. What I plan to do next week when Michael comes is get about a couple dozen paintings and images from his book and just bring them up front so everybody can see, and let Michael take it away and give his explanation for what we're looking at. And he is an expert at that, so we're glad to have him aboard, but that will be next week. So all we're going to do tonight is take questions as long as I am able, as long as my heart ticks and I can breathe the air. We'll be here for 2 hours, and thank you for coming, and I'll see if I can get right to your questions. And it looks like we got a load of questions on our chat room so far, so we'll take it away. Actually, there's only 3 questions. So, boy, if you ever wanted to ask a question, now is the time. Get in there and fill it up so that we have a lot to go through. And if I get through these 3 questions and there's no more, then it's over for tonight. So, sorry about that. At any rate, okay, let's get started here from Sam. Sam says, question. And remember, the only rule we have here is don't be a hog, number 1. Okay, so try to limit it to 2 or 3 questions. And if nobody comes on board, of course, you can ask as many questions as you want. And put the word question in front of your question so that I know it's a question. And that way I won't have to skip over the chit chat, and it'll make it a lot faster and a lot easier for everybody. All right, so question. In an interview with Peter Halland, you mentioned you know which people are behind the theory of evolution and Darwinism. Who are these people? And why do they want to spread it? I did? Did I? I don't even remember the interview I had with Peter Halland. Gosh, when was that? I just don't remember that. Must have been about 2 or 3 years ago. Um, hmm, People behind the theory of evolution. Well, they come in all shapes and sizes, so there's no particular group that would promote evolution. Um, yeah, what we should say is that the theory of evolution springboarded off the Copernican revolution. As a matter of fact, I think if there wasn't a Copernican revolution, there would be no Darwinian evolution. Um, Once the Copernican revolution got the Bible demoted to a assortment of myths and legends in the Old Testament and sometimes even in the New, um, it was just a matter of time before all the doctrines associated with Scripture started to have question marks around them. And the one place that the intellectuals, the elite of the world would go is to science. And that's because science, not very many people know. Um, Physics, chemistry, biology, they're all in the domain of the universities and um, the universities, by and large today, probably 95 or more percent, um, they have no faith. They're all atheists. I know Scientific American did a study. What was that? Back in the 20th century, I think in the 1990s, and they took a poll of all the scientists that they could get a hold. I think they had 1,800 scientists in their study, and of the not so well known scientists, you had a like a 50-50. Oh, I believe in God, I don't believe in God tally. But these are the people you never hear about. These are the people, maybe in high school, small colleges, maybe even large universities that are not well known because only a few people in large universities are popular and have a name for themselves. And of those upper echelon scientists, the rate was 90% atheistic. Okay, just bare bones. I don't believe in God. The more I know science, the less I believe that there's a chance of God existing. I remember one of the most famous was the duo um, who discovered DNA. What's Watson, Crick and Watson. I forget which one it was. I think it was Watson who said, "Now that I know DNA exists, I know there is not a God." And what he was doing there was he was comparing the medieval age, um, where they hardly knew any science. If it was science, it was just rudimentary. And all the superstition, astrology, all those kinds of things that he imposes upon the Middle Age period and says that that's what commanded their attention because they had no telescopes, no microscopes, no oscilloscopes. He says compared to that period where they believed heavily in God, but he attributes that all to superstition and not knowing how the world runs. And so God has to be pulling the levers, so to speak, all the time and to make it work and blah, blah, blah. He says now that we know DNA exists, the deoxyribose nucleic acid that has, four amino acids that are combined in various ways to make the DNA molecule that is in every cell of our body and every living organism in their cells as well. That was his ticket out of the God picture. And his rationale was, we know it's not superstition anymore. We know it's not magic like the medieval period believed in. We know it's all chemically oriented. It's all based on which amino acid is where and how it's placed, and all that. So now, if you gave that same DNA analysis to a Christian who already believed in God, he would say, well, obviously there's a God, because nobody could make a DNA molecule. No human could think up even a DNA molecule, much less create one. This has to be made by someone with a super intelligence. And then to function as well as it does, because you're talking about or, organic material here that can be affected in various ways by energy, sunlight, the need for nourishment, blah, blah, blah. And it could fall apart very easily, even though it's so intricate in its design. Um, that all has to be taken care of. How's it going to feed itself? How's it going to uh, survive? The deleterious effects of the world and all that. So the Christian looks at it and is just amazed that here's another sign that there is a designer behind all we see. So you have two totally opposite views now. You have, Crick and Watson saying, now I know there is no God, and the Christian saying, wow, now I really believe in God. So that whole mentality of Crick and Watson took over in the Enlightenment period, because science was now a force to be reckoned with. And they could peer into the cells and the atoms and look to the farthest depths of space and make their conclusions of how it all got there and how it all works. And nobody had ever done that before. We had the Greeks and the Indians given their ideas, but they were all mainly philosophical, and nobody really knew about forces and electricity and magnetism and all those things. So we entered into a whole new era by the time of Darwin. This is why 1859 was when his book, Origin of Species, was published. By that time, science was coming into its own. We were already into mm, the Industrial Revolution, when all kinds of machines were being made, big ones, small ones, and everywhere in between, to penetrate the workings of nature and the world, and at the same time as making ourselves pretty comfortable. So all of this, as you know from Crick and Watson, when they're looking at the world, and the more they do the intricacies of the world, the less they believe in God. Well, it was prime time for Charles Darwin. And Charles Darwin wasn't the first. There were about a half a dozen um, scientists before him that had the evolutionary idea. Well, for that matter, even the Greeks had some notion of evolution. That's where the word atom comes from. And they were saying that, atoms move around, they combine, and they make other substances. And there's evolution right there, the rudimentary part of evolution. Then it was just a matter of labeling all these things, which happened around the time of Darwin. So, if you're of the mentality where you believe that everything happens by time and chance and by cause and effect, well, you were just laying the red carpet for Darwin, and he picked up on that, and there we have it. Okay. And by that time, since the Copernican revolution basically had taken off the launch pad with Isaac Newton, who was the first one to use sophisticated equations to explain why things move the way they do. Um, Again, another example of cause and effect. that it's out there and it's causing and it's affecting. There was no need for God, you see, because it was believed that all these things were working by themselves. And so, if that's the case, well, and God was superstitious, boy, it was a volatile mixture of the two that eventually ended up with Darwinian evolution. Um, and men fool themselves because they think that because they can see cause and effect, that this means God is not involved. Scripture tells us God is always involved. And in that sense, he's always pulling the lever, so to speak. Not that he's going to intrude into the atom and make the electron go a different way. We don't mean that. It's just that to think that it's just natural cause and effect, men are fooling themselves because it turns out, as we've begun to study evolution, that um, the very causes and effects that they think took place are impossible to take place. Um, like natural progression of the species, they still don't have a mechanism for it. They talked about natural selection, and that has been knocked down. They've talked about gene mutation, that has been knocked down. So they're without a mechanism. So though it seemed like, if A hits B, B hits C, and C hits D, it turns out that that's not really the way it works, that there's more behind it. And the idea that an organism can progress to the point from molecules to man is just a silly idea. We're finding out now that we've gone into study what evolutionists are saying of how things came about. Um, and as I said at the beginning, that all happened with the Copernican revolution. And there's a number of personalities all behind that. And a lot of them were Catholics, for Pete's sake. Um, and Catholics are prone to this kind of stuff. They're prone. They think that they're being so sophisticated, they're being so knowledgeable that they're using their reason and all this stuff. Um, and at the same time, they reject what Scripture says. They reject what the church before them has said. They reject what the fathers have said and the medievals. And science has basically taken over the Catholic Church. So, whatever the major voices in the scientific world say, most Catholics just follow along the Pied Piper and believe anything they say, from biology and evolution to cosmology and the Big Bang and all that. But it's all bunk, all of it. And I've gone through this many times on this program, many times in my books. Of course, um, no Catholics will listen, hardly any will listen, and they think they know everything because some scientist said something. And even though the scientists can't prove it, they believe it anyway because we're sophisticated Catholics now. You see, we don't need to believe in all that stuff about you know um, the sun going around the earth and that God just spoke and things were made. We're too sophisticated now, and that's going to be their downfall because none of it's true. So these are the guys that are behind it. There's some in the church, some out of the church. They all get together and they think they're all so smart and they create their theories. And as science goes, the theory will hold for about 50 to 100 years, and then they'll find out if it doesn't work. And then they'll come up with a new theory, and so on and so on. That's happened for the last, 500 years or so. Okay. So now, this is not to say that Catholics don't use science, but the good Catholic is going to discriminate on what science has actually been proven, that we can demonstrate that has actually taken place, and separate that from all the theories of science, of things that they don't know what's going on, but they theorize that they think what's going on. That's not good science. Okay. If you can't prove the science that you bring forth, it's better not to even enter it into the picture because it's just going to confuse everybody. And, I've been through that many, many times in my studies for the last 20 years, looking at all this. And I can just safely tell you most of science hasn't the slightest idea what it's doing. A lot of scientific discoveries have been made by accident, by chance. They're looking for one thing and something else pops up by chance, and that's how we discover it. Not that we intended to, it just happened to be part of the reaction that we saw, and wow, okay, now we have electricity, now we have magnetism, and all this stuff. But, they really don't know. They don't even know what electricity is, you know? They can talk about charges and this and that, but nobody knows what it is. Magnetism, they have theories about what it is, but nobody really knows. Okay. The same thing with understanding the atom. They've got what, over 200 particles now that they have invented to try to explain what's going on in the atom. You know, they know rudimentary things about the atom. That's it. And that's as far as it goes. So, and cosmology, wow, that is just so full of theory after theory after theory because, again, they have not the slightest idea what's going on out there. Okay. All right. So, hope that helps you. I didn't name any, names, but, everybody knows who's behind most of it. As I said, they come in the church, outside of the church, and they all get together and start knocking down the Bible and what the church believed before. That's par for the course for all that group. Okay, let me move on. Question: would Romans 2:26 lend support to the Protestant forensic imputation model? It uses the word logizomai to say that uncircumcision counts as circumcision. Let's read that passage so for everybody who doesn't have their Bible handy. So that would be Romans 2:26, which says, if then the uncircumcised keep the justices of the law, shall not his uncircumcision be counted for circumcision? Okay, so normally the when we look at the word logizomai in Scripture, the Protestant idea is that logizomai is used, and the word logizomai there in that verse is the word counted. So it says, will not his uncircumcision be counted for circumcision? So when Protestants are looking at the word logizomai, which they have interpreted as the English word imputed, they have a legal framework to explain that. In other words, what they say is Abraham's faith was counted for righteousness. Okay, so what they're saying there is Abraham's faith was legally recognized as making as putting him in a place of righteousness before God. Now the word counted for them has this legal flavor because Abraham himself, in his essence, his soul essence, his body essence, he's a dirty, rotten sinner, and he hasn't been changed one iota when he was justified. Okay. So what they're saying is God looks at Abraham as if he was justified or as if he was righteous, but in reality, the justification or righteousness of Abraham is given to him or counted to him because of Christ's righteousness. In other words, because Christ was righteous and giving the atonement and obeying God. It's Christ's righteousness that God looks at that acts as a cover over Abraham. So a few weeks ago, we used the analogy that Martin Luther used, which is that the person is a pile of dung, as he said, pile of poop, smelly, dirty, rotten to the core is what each of us are in Martin Luther's view. And in order for God to see us or count us, to logizomai us as righteous, he puts the cover of snow over us that is made exclusively of Christ. Okay. So then it's just a legal credit or counting to Abraham. It's not an actual reality. Okay. Now, when I was writing my book, Not by Faith Alone, um, I, I said, no, there's got to be more to this. So I looked up all the verses in the New Testament that use the word logizomai. I think there's about 24 of them, if I remember correctly. And in each case, logizomai never referred to counting something as something in the sense of a legal transfer. In other words, the something that was being observed was never said to be bad or evil when logizomai was being used to compare it to something else. I hope I'm saying this correctly. Um, what logizomai was doing was saying that whatever was understood in the intellect to be in the object that was being observed was an actual observance of a substance, good substance, a blessed substance, a substance that had been changed, or another way to put it is a substance that is the same thing that was thought about in the intellect. Okay. The Protestants, however, were trying to make a disjunction between what was understood in the intellect and what the thing actually was. So, in other words, the thing could be a pile of dung, but the intellect counted it as something good. So that's what they were trying to tell us that the word logizomai meant. But it's never used that way in the New Testament. Never once do we have a instance where the thing that's contemplated is different than what is actually in the substance. They are one and the same. So, in other words, if the intellect says the object I'm viewing is good, then the object is actually good. Okay. It doesn't need a cover over it for me to say, oh, it is good. The thing in itself is good. Now, so let's go back to Abraham. When it says Abraham was righteous before God, or David, or whoever it is in Romans context, that means that Abraham was actually righteous. Abraham, in and of himself, was righteous. That means Abraham was changed from being unrighteous to being righteous, which means what? It means that Abraham's soul, his spiritual essence, was changed from being evil to now being good. And so when God looked at Abraham, he actually looked at Abraham and saw the change. He saw it now good, whereas before it was evil. The Protestants don't do that. When God looks at Abraham in and of himself, he is actually evil, even though he's called righteous. And again, he could be called righteous because of the covering of Christ that God put over him. So you have two diametrically opposed understandings of the fundamentals of what it is to be saved, what it is to be justified between Catholics and Protestants. Okay. And so that's basically what we get from the word logizomai. Now, with the issue in verse 26, the uncircumcision is counted as circumcision. That's exactly true. Okay. In other words, what he's saying is his uncircumcision, that is, he, whatever person you're talking about, has not had the foreskin of the penis cut off. Okay. That non cutting is viewed as circumcision in the sense that it works just as well as God wants it to work, because circumcision, as he goes on to say in the rest of the chapter, is not a physical cutting. It is a spiritual transformation. Okay. So, in other words, to extricate himself from the practice of circumcision and giving his life over to God, that's the circumcision that God wants to see. It's a circumcision of the heart. And that's exactly what occurs when our soul is transformed by the grace of God, you see. So when God looks at us, he's looking at a circumcised heart. That is a heart whose hard flesh has been cut away, metaphorically speaking, and now is a true heart to follow God, you see. So again, logizomai is used in the same exact way that we saw with the justification issue. It's not some kind of legal status that we have with God. Circumcision of the heart is a real transformation that occurs in our soul essence. Okay? So the word logizomai is being used consistently. And so that's all we can say about it. All right, next question. Why did Catholicism revise the Ten Commandments to entirely leave out the second commandment, no graven image, and the traditional 10th commandment, coveting, was split into two? Well, Catholicism didn't revise the Ten Commandments. We're the ones who we were the only game in town. Okay, the Protestants didn't come along until the 1500s, and the Orthodox were here in 1054, but they didn't change the Ten Commandments. Okay, now it just so happens that the Ten Commandments can be read in two different ways. Okay, um, you can combine the ninth and 10th commandment into one, which is what the Protestants do, and they just say you shall not covet, wife, goods, and thing, and so they make it one commandment. But that's an innovation. That wasn't the way that the Ten Commandments were read from the beginning. Okay. So, as I said, we were the only game in town. We're the ones who transfer the Ten Commandments, and the whole world read them the way the Catholics were reading them. So the Protestants coming along, at least some of them, and they want to make the first commandment into two, and then combine the ninth and 10th commandment into one. Well, that's their innovation. Okay, that doesn't mean it's right. It just means that when they were reading Exodus 20 or Deuteronomy 5, that's what they came up with. Okay, so it's not Catholicism that did the changing, it's the Protestants that did the changing. All right, Will says, Dr. Sungenis, was the letter from the Argentina bishops regarding Amoris Laetitia, now part of the magisterium because it was added to the AAS. I think that's the apostolic. Blah, 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 what's the next word? I forget. That's like the official document of the Vatican. Can divorced and remarried Catholics receive communion? Okay, so first part of your question is was was it now part of the magisterium because it was added to the AAS? Um, the AAS just says what the official documents are. So, in other words, if Amoris Laetitia was an official document, it would be so before it was added to the AAS. Okay, the AAS is just basically saying, here's an official document. Now, look, Amoris Laetitia is a official encyclical of the Catholic Church. Love it, like it, despise it, or whatever. It is a official document of the Catholic Church, and it has to be dealt with. Okay. Now, um, but the word magisterium, you use the word magisterium. Well, that's kind of an open question as to what level of the magisterium Amoris Laetitia occupies. Okay. It's certainly not, um, a defined dogma of the church, so it doesn't reach level one and two. And there are 7 levels, basically. Some people say there's 10 levels of authority in Catholic documents. So, um, where it reaches is, look, it's an authoritative document, and if we have trouble with it, we're going to have to deal with it. And what we need to find out, which is hard to find out, is exactly what Amoris Laetitia is teaching. And this is the problem with some Catholic documents. They can be ambiguous, they can be vague, they can be not cover all the bases, not give all the details, blah, blah, blah. We have that problem with Humanae Vitae still after it was given in 1969 by Paul VI. There's still questions about what does it really mean? Are we ever allowed to practice birth control? Blah, 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 all this stuff. So it's an open question. Okay. Not that it's completely vague and ambiguous. We do have um, a major consensus that yes, the church wants to stop artificial birth control. But what the exceptions are to that, how much leeway we have to use natural contraception, if you want to put it that way, where we can decide how many children we want and all that's still up in the air. Okay. And so that doctrine still needs to be worked on. And the same would be true with Amoris Laetitia. And as far as divorced and remarried Catholics receiving communion, um, I don't I don't think that encyclical actually says that. Okay. I've looked at the footnote where it supposedly said so, and it is not clear there what actually is being said. So, unfortunately, as much as the Pope wanted to tidy things up, so to speak, there people were reading into it a little bit too much than what was actually said in the document. And some people wanted the document to say more than what it said. And you see, well, the problem stems from these churches in Europe where, they're not preaching the gospel anymore in Catholic churches. They still have the liturgy, of course, but they water it down and they don't explain it, and people don't know really what the gospel is anymore. And sometimes it's just a big social gathering because the liberals in control of the theology hardly believe the doctrines that have been propagated throughout the church's tradition. And so their churches are emptying. And this happens to every liberal church that comes along. They try to make the gospel wide open and freer and not so persnickety and looking at all our peccadillos and they just try to make it a happy kind of a thing. And look, people don't want that. Okay. If they want that, they can go to the circus. They want to be convicted of their sins when they go to the church. And that's the church's job because nobody else is going to do it. And if they feel that, oh, everything's fine with like, why do I come to church in the first place? Okay. If nothing's wrong with me, everything's fine, and all I do is pay my dues, so to speak, why am I coming? And so their churches empty out. This has happened in America, it's happened in Europe, it happens everywhere where the liberal theology of Catholicism takes hold and people just see no sense in going to mass anymore. Okay. It's just the opposite of what the liberals think. They think if they make it more open ended and make everybody happy and all that, we're just going to flood the church with people. No, they'd rather go to the ball game on Sunday than come to church because they're going to feel the same way. Okay. When they come to church, they need to be convicted of their sin and that the Eucharist forgives their sins, at least their venial sins. And so the homily from the pulpit has to be centered around convicting the parishioner of his sins. Okay? Mea culpa, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. Those are not just words that are said to keep the routine going. They are to be said and they are to be explicated during the homily so that the people know why they're there. Okay? So that's why those churches are emptying out. And because they're emptying out, well, we got to figure some way to get them back in. And so you have this vague notion now where Catholics who are divorced and remarried can come back to the church and receive the Eucharist and be full-fledged members because the churches have already been emptied out. So we got to get them back. And a lot of these people that got money and the church needs money. So let's figure out a way to get them back. Yeah. So that's why the German bishops were trying to corral the Pope into making it such that divorced and remarried could come back into the church and receive the Eucharist. They can come back into the church. That's fine because they still have an obligation to worship God. Okay. But as far as receiving the Eucharist, that's a whole different story. Now, as I said, it's not clear in that document, Amoris Laetitia, whether that is certainly the case or not. Okay. So that doctrine, that teaching is going to need work. And so far, they haven't worked on it. And I don't know what the case is over in Germany now. Maybe somebody who knows about what's happening in Germany can tell us. And if divorced and remarried Catholics are receiving communion, then it's all under the guise of the fact that somehow Amoris Laetitia has allowed it, but that's again is not clear in that document. So one way or the other, they're going to get what they want anyway. Okay, so we'll see how long this lasts. Okay, let's go on to the next question. Should Catholics observe Sabbath as Saturday? No, no, no. Okay. The Sabbath law, the seventh day Sabbath, was an Old Testament law. We don't go by the Old Testament law any longer. Okay. No matter what law it was, whether it's in the Ten Commandments or the ceremonial law or the civil law or the Levitical law or the Aaronic law or whatever, we don't go by it any longer. It has been revoked. Okay? The whole Old Testament law has been revoked. It no longer has legal force. Of course, which begs the question, well, then why do we obey the Ten Commandments? because the New Testament church took the Ten Commandments under its legal jurisdiction. So we obey the Ten Commandments not because they're in the Old Testament, but because the New Testament decided that those are good laws. And so now they're under legal jurisdiction of the new covenant, not the old covenant. Okay. Now, in taking the Ten Commandments, the church also decided that the seventh day was no longer going to be the day of worship. Sunday, because Christ rose from the dead on Sunday, was now going to be the day of worship. So when you find the commandments reiterated in Romans 13, for example, you don't even find the Sabbath law there, okay? Because that law was changed by the New Testament church. So when the New Testament gets the chance to tell us when the day of worship is, it tells us, for example, in 1 Corinthians 16, verse 1, that it's the first day of the week. And in Acts chapter 20, verse 7, that it's the first day of the week. Okay. You are under New Testament covenant law, not Old Testament Mosaic law. Okay. And that makes all the difference. Now, the church can take any law that it wants that was used in the Old Testament and make it part of the New. She hasn't done that very often, but sometimes she does. Okay. So all those laws that had legality in the Old Testament, they still have what you might call moral appeal or ethical appeal to Christians who live in the New Testament era. And so the church is not going to abandon what was written in the Old Testament, but she's going to be very judicious about what she takes from the Old Covenant. Okay, that's why you don't see the circumcision practiced anymore. That was a law, not only for the Mosaic law, but for the Abrahamic covenant. Okay, but the church said, no, we're just not going to do that. It was too burdensome for them, and it's going to be burdensome for us. And so Acts 15 tells us that St. Peter, as the first pope, decided, we ain't going to do this. Okay, and we haven't done it for 2,000 years. So the church decides which of those laws it wants to use. And usually it's because, hey, that's a good law. We'll keep that one. You know, do not steal. That's a good law. We'll keep that. Okay. So that's why we do it. But as far as the Sabbath law, no, the church changed that. And you need to know why. Now, some people will say, well, the Mosaic law, you know, it did away with the ceremonial law, but not the moral law. That is false. Okay, that is false. The law that was revoked was the whole Mosaic law, moral, civil, ceremonial. Okay, the whole law. Because if it was in force, then we better look out. Because certain of those moral laws require death as the civil punishment for breaking that moral law. So if you want the moral law, well, then you're going to have to take the civil law also. If you think the Mosaic covenant didn't revoke the moral law, okay? And for anybody who has a religion other than Judaism, that moral law of the Old Testament didn't allow that. You could be stoned for that too. Okay. So you don't want the moral law of the Mosaic law coming into your life because you're putting your life at risk. Okay. The moral law, the civil law ceremony said nothing about having priests and bishops or churches for that matter, or even believing in Jesus Christ. It prophesied Jesus Christ, but they weren't commanded. Okay. Nobody knew about Jesus Christ back then except the prophets. So if you want the moral law to remain after the Mosaic law has been done away with, you're going to put yourself in big trouble. Okay. So The whole Mosaic law was revoked and replaced or superseded by the new covenant. And the new covenant will determine what the civil, ceremonial, and moral laws are. As far as the ceremonial, no circumcision. As far as ceremonial, which are worship laws, we go to Mass. We were required to go to Mass every Sunday and on the feast days that obligate us. Okay. We're required to go to confession. We're required to receive confirmation. We're required to marry and not divorce. And if we are divorced, we can't remarry. Okay. These are all the new covenant laws that we're now under. And as you know, with marriage and divorce, that has been changed. Okay. So, very, very important that you understand this distinction between old covenant and new covenant. And the former is not here any longer except in letter, and we take from it as we desire in the new covenant. All right. Question. Catholic apologists say that there are no works involved in initial justification, but they are involved in the process of justification. But isn't baptism a work for initial justification? Okay. Um, the best way to start with this is to go to the Council of Trent, chapter 8. And in there it says, baptism infuses us with faith, hope, and charity. Now, charity is not faith, so obviously it's a work. Okay. And that's where the debate has started and pretty much ended, that those who think that initial justification is just faith don't realize that when they're baptized, you are infused with faith, hope, and love. Why? Because baptism is not just a sprinkling with water. Baptism is the process by which the Spirit comes upon you and changes your soul. As Thomas said, it changes the quality of your soul. So it's not no longer dead in sin, it's now alive in Christ. Okay. Now we can't see our soul, we don't know what's going on, but that's what's going on. Okay. So there's always a debate in the Protestant world whether baptism is a work or not. Okay. And this is the problem that they run into with their faith alone concept of justification. You'll find some Protestants that say, no, baptism is a work, so we can't have works, and so it's all faith. And baptism is just the natural consequence of having faith. But see, they don't believe that baptism actually changes them. They believe that baptism is just a demonstration that you've already been saved by faith alone. Okay, there's only what? The Anglicans and the Lutherans that believe baptism does anything to you at all. All the other ones, the Presbyterians, the Methodists, the Baptists, they all believe that the baptism part is just a show, basically, just a demonstration. So they don't get into this thicky wicket of trying to figure out how whether baptism is a work or not, because it doesn't mean anything anyway. It's just a symbol to them. Okay. But the Catholics have said, no, baptism is actually needed, and it proves that it's not by faith alone. Because what is actually changing you? It's the baptism. All the faith does is bring you to the font of baptism. And that is a faith that comes as according to the Council of Trent, and that would be chapters 4 and 5. God gives actual grace to every man so that he will believe in God or help him believe in God and put him on the road to salvation. God gives actual grace to do that. And it says that even we can do things to put ourselves on the road to salvation, even if we're not Christian yet. We can do Christian-like things that put us in the way of God's grace. Wherein, if God sees a non-Christian being kind to another person or helping the poor, this or that, they can do that. Okay, because they have a conscience. God's given them a conscience. They know right and wrong, and they know that it will be wrong to leave a poor man or a naked man or a man that wants food by himself. And so the actual grace of God prompts them to do those good things, even before they even know what a Christian is. Okay. So they can do that. And what do you have to have? You have to have faith that some supreme being exists in order for you to be motivated and relieve your guilt that you're helping this poor man here in need of things. Okay. All by God. We do nothing good except by God's actual grace. Okay. So, and God gives actual grace to the Christian to do the same thing. Because even though his soul is regenerated, his body is not regenerated. His body would like to sleep in bed for 12 hours a day. Okay. And not do any work. And that's where the spirit strives against the flesh. So God has to give us actual grace. And as a Catholic, you have an abundance of actual grace. There's many things you can do. You can, dip your hand in the holy water and make the sign of the cross. That gives you actual grace to do the things that you should do. Okay? So God gives actual grace to the saved and unsaved, just like he says, he gives rain and sunshine to the saved and unsaved in Matthew chapter 5, verse 43 and onward. Okay? So, what we're saying here is that once let's say the non-Christian is moved by actual grace and he responds the way he should respond, and now he's getting real close to getting the sanctifying grace. Okay, and that's going to come from the church in baptism, but the way he's going to know that that happens is somebody preaches the gospel to him, and he's ready for that because he's already been moved by the actual grace to do good things. And now he has to find out, wow, why do you need actual grace? Why has God been prompting you with actual grace? Because you're a sinner and you need to get rectified with God totally. It's not just doing good things now. Now you really need to need to know the story of Adam and Eve, where sin came from, what condition your soul is in, and we've got the remedy for you. It's called baptism. And baptism will now give them sanctifying grace, which now really changes their soul. They're no longer living off the actual grace, so to speak. Now they have sanctifying grace, which is even more powerful than the actual grace. And they call it actual because it makes you act. Okay? They call it sanctifying grace because now you're sanctified. Now your soul has been cleansed and you're a new man, a new creature. And now you join the church and you find out how many more works you can do, corporal, spiritual works of mercy, how many more prayers you can say, and how more secure you are in your salvation than you were when you just had these actual graces leading you to God, you see. So, I hope I answered your question. All right. Germanicus says, are there music genres that are inherently good or bad? By that, I mean putting aside lyrics and whatnot. To put in humorously, are rock and rap of the devil? Well, let's answer the first one. Are there music genres that are inherently good or bad? Yeah. What we'll find out next week when we have E. Michael Jones here is that the 12-note chromatic scale is you could call that a genre of music. um, gets away from the true and beautiful music that was created prior to the modern age. Um, and he'll explain to you why that is the case. So we'll save it for him to do that. As far as genres of rock and rap, of course they're of the devil. I mean, just listen to the words, okay? That will alone, and then the beat is Mike will tell you, he'll give you the right musical definitions for music like that. Yes, it's of the devil. Okay. So now when we say of the devil, we're not saying that, somebody goes down to the pit of hell and starts creating this music. Look, all men, if they're not Christians, are under the power of evil. Okay. Unless they're like the man I just described, who responds to the actual grace of God and moves toward Christianity. But most people don't respond to the actual grace of God. They're going to respond to what the world displays to them, and in that world we have demons who want to disrupt any kind of message of God that's in the world and take our eyes off of God. And how do you do that? Well, you get to the things that the body loves to do: alcohol, drugs, sex, rap music, whatever is going to take our attention off of God and put it on the world and the things that we lust after. That's what the world's going to use. Okay. So, of course, there's genres of music that do that. There's genres of art that do that. There's genres of sculpture that do that. There's genres of theater and literature that do that. Okay. We've seen them. We don't need to be educated anymore on that. We all know what they are. So, all right. Nellie says, what are your thoughts on the debate Pints of Aquinas with Jeff and brother Peter? Did you watch it? I just got back from a lecture series yesterday, so I didn't get to watch all of it. I did watch, I think, the first 15 minutes. So I watched Jeff Kassman in his 10-minute opening. I thought was pretty good. Um, I would have done it differently if I was in that debate because I know what Peter Diamond is after. So I would, not saying that Jeff did a bad job at all, but I would have done it differently. I listened to the, I think, first 7 minutes of Peter Diamond, and that's usual Peter Diamond stuff, quoting all kinds of encyclicals and statements from popes that he misinterprets. So I know what we're going to get from Peter Diamond, but I haven't watched the whole thing. I haven't watched any rebuttals. I'm sorry, any cross examination or rebuttals. So I can't make a judgment on it until I watch the whole thing, which maybe I can do 2 weeks from now, since we're going to have Mike Jones here next Wednesday. And I'm probably going to, if I think it's worth it, I'm probably going to be an interlocutor like I am with some other debates where I have the two opponents debating each other, and then I will come in intermittently and say whether I thought the remarks were good, bad, or indifferent, and what should have been said that wasn't said, and all that stuff. I've done that a few times on YouTube videos that I've made, and I may do that here because this is such an important topic. This whole idea of sedevacantism. And I've debated Peter Diamond before, and I've read his literature, so I know how he approaches things. And so, yeah, I will eventually do that. Okay. Question from Florida: is Ian an example of the Coriolis effect? Of course, all hurricanes are. That's why you see them turning counterclockwise. Okay. So Now, if you were to go below the equator down to South America, that hurricane would be turning clockwise. Okay. And what does this tell us? Well, it tells us that the Earth is right smack in the middle of the mass center of the universe. Okay. Because the Coriolis force is created by the rotating universe. And because the Earth is 4,000 miles in radius, it's going to feel some of that Coriolis force that the universe generates. If you just had the core of the Earth, let's say, a small core, it would hardly feel any of the Coriolis force because that's the inertial center. But anything that's away from the center, especially the surface of the Earth, it's 4,000 miles from the center of the Earth, it's going to feel the Coriolis force. And um, now the other reason it's going to happen in Florida and not Alaska is because of the wind currents that are down there in the Gulf and the Caribbean that come up from Africa and they travel across and then they go up the Atlantic coast and then they dissipate and then the whole thing starts over again. So that's where they start, and then they get the energy to continue circling from the Coriolis force, but the force that makes them move up the Atlantic coast is all by wind, the wind currents that we have that are daily, and sometimes those you just never know when that wind force is going to reach a point, the breaking point, so to speak, where it turns into a hurricane. Okay, we just don't know, but we do know where those wind forces come from. All right, so can you please expand on Luke 9:62? So let's take a look at that. Luke 9. 62. Jesus said to him, "No man putting his hand to the plow and looking back is fit for the kingdom of God." Okay, so what I'm going to do here, I'll bring up my commentary on Luke, and we'll see what we have. I think I have something on that, so such a great Bible, such a great commentary. It's got great pictures in it. And now my computer decides not to work. You ever have that where you press your down button and your up button and it just stays there? That happens to me a lot. So I'm trying to get to Luke 9:62. So bear with me here. Okay, that's chapter 8. We gotta go to chapter 9. Chapter 9. Luke has some long chapters, that is for sure. All right. I'm getting close to verse 62. Let's see if I have anything on that. The reason I'm doing this is because I want you to see how great this Bible is. All right, so looking back, I have the man's answer seeming innocent enough. Okay, so that means we need to read the context. Verse 61, it says, "And another said, I will follow you, Lord, but let me first take my leave of them that are at my house." Jesus said to him, "No man putting his hand to the plow and looking back is fit for the kingdom of God." All right. The man's answer, seeming innocent enough, but Jesus uses these short stories because the meaning lies beneath the surface. The issue here is that if the man goes back to his friends, he may be tempted to remain with them once he realizes the loneliness and harshness of life he may encounter in preaching the gospel. The temptation is to look to the past for comfort. He is like a man who is plowing a field and is constantly looking behind himself, which is noted in the present participle "blepon," that is, to look back continually, to see if he is making straight lines in his field. But while he is turning around to look, the turning of his body forces the plow to turn and the line becomes crooked. If he only looked forward, he could have made the furrow straight. Thus, such a man is not fit for the kingdom because he is too sentimental about his past life and will always be tempted to go back to it. So that's my words of wisdom on that verse. I hope they helped you. Okay. Where was I? Oh, I skipped a question here, looks like. Una says, do we know anything about resurrected bodies when it comes to race? Will a person's resurrected body be the same race as on earth? Or are resurrected bodies non-racial, or do we know? We don't know. Okay. What we do know is that we each have an identity, and part of that identity is our physical body and our personality, which comes from our soul. So, in the sense that we keep our identity, therefore you're not going to be me, and I'm not going to be you. Okay. Uh, Certain characteristics that we have are going to be kept in place. Okay. And I would assume that race would be a part of that. Okay. Because that's where we originated from. That's how God made us. There's nothing wrong with race. Nobody's better because they're white or yellow or black. We're all, especially in heaven, in the new heaven and the new earth. So I would assume that we would just transfer our race, our physical uh, identity over to whatever God has for this spiritual body that He has planned for us to assume at the end of time. And what we do know also is whatever is going to be transformed, it's going to be absolutely beautiful. We talk about in Catholicism, we talk about seeing the beatific vision. Okay. That and the way I put it in my paper is that God is so beautiful that you could stare at him for eternity and never get bored, as it were. Okay. Not that that's the only thing the beatific vision is, but it's a total contemplation of God. But God is beautiful, and we will see him in all his glorious beauty. Then the other thing about that is 1 John 3, verse 2 tells us, and we shall be like him in our beauty. Okay. So if that's the case, some of us are going to have some changes, right? Including yours truly, to be really beautiful, but we will be recognized for who we are. Okay. So that identity stays, but it all will be made beautiful. It's like the difference between a 5-year-old child and an 85-year-old person. Well, let's say the same child, the child that's 5 and then grows up to be 85. Well, at 85, you're not too good looking, are you? Okay. So, but at 5 years old, you're really cute. So we see the difference in how in one phase of our life we can be very beautiful, and another phase be sort of ugly, um, at least physically speaking. Okay, whereas if you've matured in your Christian faith and you're 85 and you've done well, and you might be the most beautiful person inside, even though you're deteriorating on the outside. Um, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that whatever physical characteristics we have now, they will be totally enhanced, improved, vastly improved, so that as First John 3:2 says, we shall be like him in our image. Okay. Wow. What is that? That is amazing to look forward to. Okay. A body without the, the need to sense pain, but can feel at the same time, a body that will never cry, a body that will never be sad in order to cry, total joy 24/7 forever. Can you imagine that? Okay. I mean, that's what it's just going to it's beyond our comprehension. But at least we know some things, that we will maintain our identity and God will enhance whatever we have to be the most beautiful it could possibly be, to be just like God. Okay. Next question. Has the CDF replied back regarding your imprimatur for your commentary? Have you sent another letter to the CDF like you claimed in your past episodes? Um, no, I didn't send another letter yet because I just wrote to the censor Librori 2 weeks ago, and I asked him if he had received a reply from the CDF because I said I haven't received one. And now that's been what? Since December of last year. So that's 10 months. And he said to me, no, he hasn't received one, and he doesn't think that will receive one if they haven't replied by now. So the CDF basically is, if they haven't responded to either me or him, then I don't think it's even worth writing again. The only thing I would say in my writing to them is I'm disgusted with you. You're not doing your job. Just like the people who sent the letter to the Pope about his Amoris Laetitia encyclical. What does it mean? How does it apply? Blah blah blah. And he never answered them. Well, that's par for the course to the Vatican today. So the next thing I asked him was, okay, so look, I can't take your authority, your recommendations, unless I get the okay from a higher authority. So I suggested to him that we meet with the bishop and discuss this issue about the covenant. Now, if you aren't familiar, the reason we sent the letter is because was it paragraph 121 of the Universal Catechism has a sentence in there that doesn't belong, and that says the old covenant has never been revoked. First of all, it doesn't even fit in the context, and second of all, it made a heretical statement. And depending on what it means by by the words "old covenant," okay, and usually that refers to the Mosaic Law, but there's a whole cadre of hierarchs today in the Vatican, outside the Vatican, bishops, cardinals, you name it, who think that the Mosaic covenant is still in force for the Jews, okay, which is heresy. And I'm not about to allow my book because he wanted me to take all the references out of my commentary where it said that the old covenant has been revoked. Okay. Again, that's heresy. We fought this battle. It's 2022. We fought this battle back in 2008. And we got them to agree to take their statement about the old covenant not being revoked out of the U.S. catechism. At least they agreed to that. But now you have a whole new set of faces at the Vatican who don't know anything about what happened in 2008. And so, we're back to square one. And now we can't even get him to respond. Uh, so, um, so he hasn't responded yet to my email about meeting with the bishop. So I don't know where that's going to end, what the end game is. All right, question. Marian apparition witnesses describe the Blessed Virgin as having different physical appearances. Our Lady of Good Help, the witness said she had blonde hair, for example. Why is this? Good question. I don't know. I don't know why Our Lady doesn't come back in the same way she appears in every other instance. That's a good question. Um, Apparently, if they're real, um, now I don't know if Our Lady of Good Help. I guess you're not talking about Our Lady of Good Success. I'm not sure I'm familiar with Our Lady of Good Help. But first of all, the apparitions have to be approved by the church. If they're not approved by the church, then the question of why her hair is different is superfluous. Okay, so that's the first thing I would try to find out. Was Our Lady of Good Help approved by the Vatican? Um, like, for example, if you're talking about Medjugorje, okay, um, I would not base anything on any kind of Marian apparition that happened there because that's all fake. Okay. And if that can be fake, then others can be fake. Like, what is it? Bayside, another problematic appearance of Our Lady. So, who was it who said, was it Padre Pio or Saint John of the Cross? I think it was who asked the Virgin to stop appearing to him because the devil would appear to him and look just like the Virgin Mary, and he couldn't tell the difference and didn't want to be deceived by the devil. Okay, so this is the danger of flocking after these apparitions that haven't been approved, um, because especially if the devil knows that you're looking for these apparitions, that you're looking to be tantalized, that you need some kind of spiritual experience with apparitions in order to keep your faith. Okay, yeah, well, if I were the devil and I knew that, I'd come to you in an apparition too. Okay, so you know what I'm saying is, please don't base your faith on these apparitions. They're private in the first place. They're not the general knowledge of the church. We really don't need them. And not that I'm trying to say that none of them are good. Okay, like Fatima. I've written about Fatima incessantly because that's the one good one I know. Okay, and Lourdes and some others. Our Lady of Good Success also. Um, but you know, I don't base my life on them. Okay, and you shouldn't either. And that way you won't be deceived. Okay, so Catholics are really susceptible to this kind of stuff. And I say that just to warn you. All right, question. What is the difference between gravity and the inertial forces? I'm asking because you said in a video that the inertial forces are akin to gravity. How are they related? Okay. Well, they're related in the sense that they are forces and they move things. Okay. So, whereas gravity is a radial force that will pull, and it only comes from circular bodies. Well, they don't have to necessarily be circular, but they're going to come from bodies that have let's just put it this way, they're going to come from bodies that have mass, okay, but it's going to be a radial force, and it's going to decrease by the inverse square law, okay. So we can measure that force depending on the distance from the object that has the mass. Um, the inertial forces are akin to gravity because they move objects as well, rather large objects. Okay, so even in the Newtonian system, the reason the Earth can go around the sun is because the Earth has a once it's put in motion, the Earth has an inertia or a momentum, and that momentum or inertia will make it move in a straight line. Okay, this is Newton's big thing. The reason he needed an absolute universe was so that he could say that an object moved in a straight line. Because if the universe wasn't absolute and it moved, then you can never say the object moved in a straight line. All right. So if the Earth moves in a straight line, well, how's it going to curve around the sun? Well, it curves around the sun because the sun has gravity that pulls in the Earth. Okay. So the net result is that the Earth goes around in a curve, whereas it wanted to go straight. Okay. Now, but once you make the Earth go in a curved motion around the sun, first of all, it has to have the right acceleration, because if the acceleration is too slow, then it's going to fall into the sun. If the acceleration is too fast, then it's going to go out of its orbit out into outer space. Okay. So it has to be just right. And the result of that being just right is that there's going to be what appears to be a force called the centrifugal force that the Earth is going to feel or react to as it's going around the sun. And that is to tend to make it go outward. And that's called the centrifugal force. So, in order to keep the Earth in the circle around the sun, the gravitational force has to be equal to the centrifugal force. And there has to be zero at the Earth so that the Earth can continue to go around the sun. That's in the Newtonian system. Okay. So, right there, even though the Newtonians think that the centrifugal force is a fictitious force because it's not real, it's just a consequence of the fact that the Earth is going around the sun, the fact is, in their equations, the centrifugal force has to equal the gravitational force. Otherwise, the Earth is going to go into the sun or out into outer space. Okay. So, in that sense, even in the Newtonian sense, the inertial force of the centrifugal force is acting akin to gravity, okay, having an effect on the movement of a body. Now, in the geocentric system, the centrifugal force is a real force, okay? So, this is why the sun can go around the Earth. Because the centrifugal force is not fictitious, it actually is created by the universe that rotates. Okay, so every object in the universe is going to feel that centrifugal force. What's the balance to that? The balance to that is the Coriolis force, because that goes in the opposite direction of the centrifugal force. And as a matter of fact, the Coriolis force is twice the magnitude of the centrifugal force. And once those two forces are put on the sun, that sun's going to go around and around the Earth ad infinitum. Okay. And a better way to understand this is to take the Earth out of the system. Just take the Earth out of the geocentric system and just have empty space there. Okay. Will the sun do the same thing? You bet it will. Okay. The same centrifugal and Coriolis force are going to be on the sun, and it's going to rotate around that center of mass, but there's no mass there. So it's just an ideological point that sun's going to go around. And that's because of the centrifugal and Coriolis force acting on the sun to make it move around the Earth. Okay, so again, there, even in the geocentric system, you have the inertial forces acting just like gravity. Okay. Now, Einstein said this himself in his general relativity that the inertial forces, centrifugal and Coriolis, are equal to and act just like gravity does. Okay. So that's where we get it from general relativity. But in the larger picture, we get it from the general principle of relativity, not the general relativity theory per se. The general relativity theory basically took that principle from the general principle of relativity. Okay. All right. Jimmy Akin said that the flesh found in dinosaur bones could easily be explained by the bones being vacuum sealed from its environment. What's your take on that? Jimmy. First of all, what vacuum seal is he talking about? Um, a vacuum seal means that there is no possible way oxygen could get to that. Okay. But we know that there's oxygen down deep in the soil, number one. Okay. Um, we know that things that have died decompose based on oxygen. We see it all the time. So, what vacuum seal is he talking about? Okay. If you, um, what was the name of that lady? Mary Schweitzer. Now, she didn't use this excuse. She's the one that found the T Rex bone sticking out of the cliff back in 2010. And her boss, Jack Horner, said, I want you to figure out a way how this bone could survive, not only the bone, but the collagen that was found in it, the red blood cells, the blood vessels that were all found in the dinosaur bone. And they found them when they broke apart the bone by mistake. Um, she came up with a theory that there is some kind of formaldehyde substance in the soil that kept these bones from deteriorating and the organic tissue from deteriorating. Okay. And then they asked her, okay, can you give us a sample of this formaldehyde like substance in the area where you were doing your excavation? And of course, we stall and we make excuses and blah, and so we never got it. But because you're going to put forth a theory of why a 70 million year old bone and organic tissue doesn't deteriorate, you better have something that not only you can say works, but you show it to us. Okay. Now we know when we put organic specimens into formaldehyde that you can put them in a jar of formaldehyde, they will last for a long time. But whether they can last 70 million years, that's something nobody's ever tested. Okay. So not only did she have that lame excuse that is a formaldehyde like substance, um, she wasn't dumb enough to use the fact that, well, if it's deprived of oxygen, then it's not going to deteriorate. Okay. Because she knows that there's oxygen in the soil, no matter how minute it's going to be. As long as there is a source of oxygen in the soil, it's going to deteriorate. Okay. So, Jimmy can dream up all these things he wants to. Yeah, if you had a perfect vacuum, you may be able to make it last for 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 years. But then he's got to prove that it could last for 70 million years. He doesn't know that. So he's fishing. He's on a fishing expedition. And this is the only thing that he can possibly think that might give us some extension of life other than the normal. See, Jimmy's another one that has been sucked in by the scientific establishment to think that, we evolved from apes and molecules and all that stuff. And um, I wouldn't listen to a word he says on the science. Last week, I asked if a woman can be rulers of a country. You said no. But I found that Deborah was the fourth judge of ancient Israel. What about this? Well, yeah, Deborah was a judge. Um, you have some women prophets too. Huldah was a prophet. Who else? Um, but these are exceptions to the rule. Okay. For whatever reason, at that time, there weren't any qualified men, or the men had been killed in battle, or the men were in prison with the Philistines, because at this time in the Judges, they were back and forth with the Philistines at war. This was a period of 460 years. So they had how many judges? Like 16 judges, I believe. One of them was a woman. Okay. So for whatever reason, extenuating circumstances, they allowed Deborah to be the judge because she was such a tremendous woman. They couldn't find a man, blah, blah, blah. They allowed it. She became a judge, and that's it. It's over. After that, we don't find any women judges. We don't find any women kings. No women rulers at all in Israel. So she is definitely an exception to the rule, and exceptions don't become the rule. Okay. So if by and large there's an exception, it doesn't negate what St. Paul was teaching in 1 Timothy chapter 2. Okay. Where he says, I do not permit a woman to teach or have authority over the man. Okay. As a matter of fact, Paul in both 1 Corinthians 11 and 1 Timothy chapter 2 goes back to the Old Testament, where he draws from, as we were saying earlier about the Old Testament, he draws from those the principles that he establishes in the New Testament of why a woman is not to be in authority. Okay. So, yeah, you're going to have anomalies once in a while. And there's nothing in there that's in Judges where it says, yes, God says he approved of Deborah as the judge. Deborah was elected by the judges, by the people of the day. Okay. There's no divine intervention here. Granted, Deborah was blessed in that she was a good warrior for the Jews at that time. But, once she's in there, that's what's going to happen. She's either going to be a success or a failure. But your question is, does this upset the rules of women to be under the authority of men? No, it doesn't, because the exception, if it was an exception, is not the rule. Okay. All right. We got about 20 minutes to go. Robert says, will I go to heaven when I die? I'm a good man and Christian, but not Catholic. Well, God is going to be the judge, Robert, not me. Okay. I don't save anybody. And all I would tell you is if you want to be a really good man, okay, you better look into becoming Catholic. Okay. Just the fact that you asked me the question, will I go to heaven if I'm not Catholic, means you've been thinking about it. And if you've been thinking about it, that means it's bothering you. And if it's bothering you, you're going to need to salve your conscience. So I would look into becoming Catholic, and we'll have a better handle on how to answer your question. Okay. But that's between you and God. God will be your judge. And I'm glad God is your judge and not me, because I don't know you. God does. And God's going to be the fairest and the most just and the most loving and the kindest and all the superlatives you can think of when he's your judge. So you want him as your judge, not me. All right. Do you really believe that academics are really dictating? Let me see. Did you write more on this? I don't see more here. So, Joe, I'm not sure what you're saying. Do you really believe that academics are really dictating? And then you have blank. So I don't know what you were referring to. I didn't see your name. I scrolled down a little bit, but I didn't see your name come up. Let me try again. Oh, here it is. Do you really believe that people in the academy are truly dictating the direction of anything? The control seems to be through the powerful who provide the money through their foundations. Oh yeah. Yeah, no argument with that, Joe. Definitely. Nothing gets done in this world without money. Nothing. Okay. That's just the reality of life. So yeah, they're behind it. But then you need the people that have money are financiers. You need the intellectuals to write the equations, you know, to make up their excuses, so that they can convince the rest of the world. So it's a nice duo that they have here. But I agree with you; it can't be done without money. Now, let me go back up to where I was. Shane says, someone asked a couple weeks ago about the essence energy distinction in God. Have you looked into this at all? I think the main saints cited are Thomas Aquinas and Gregory Palamas. I didn't look into it any further than what I had already said. Um, I know there's a disagreement there. But actually, if you look at Thomism, they had a disagreement whether um, whether um, let's see, what were the two polarities there? What was more important, being or essence? Okay, so the Thomists, as far as I understand, the Thomists have said no, essence is not the prime quality of God. Being is, existence is, and essence comes after. So even the Thomists have had trouble in trying to figure out, we talk about essence energy distinction. Well, they had a being essence distinction. So, philosophically, there's always problems. I don't want to get into it right now. I've said a few weeks ago what I'm going to say about that, and we'll leave it there. Question 3 from Will. Dr. Sungenis, how do ring lasers prove the universe revolves, rotates around the Earth? Can we use the Michelson-Morley sapphire oscillators and ring lasers to prove that the Earth is not moving? Well, a ring laser is just a smaller version of the Sagnac experiment. Excuse me. Where you have one light beam going counterclockwise and one going clockwise. And every time, every day, 24 hours a day, the one of them is going to go faster than the other. Okay. And you can use that in many, many applications because it forms an absolute, basically, that you can, a foundation on which you can see if everything else is abiding by this distinction between the light waves going around in a ring laser because it's so precise. The distinction between the two lights is very precise. So once you have something that's precise, you can use it as an absolute to measure everything else, which is why it works so well. Okay, the second question, can we use the Michelson-Morley sapphire oscillators and ring lasers to prove that the Earth is not moving? Well, yeah, if we didn't have the Lorentz transform to deal with, okay? So in other words, these oscillators, which are in vacuum chambers, show down to what, the fifth decimal point, that there is no difference between the light beams going um, east and west as opposed to north and south. Okay. They only have a slight difference. So that would show us that the Earth isn't moving, because if it was moving, then the east west direction is going to be slower than the north south direction, whether it's in a vacuum tube or sapphire oscillator or whatever it is. Okay. So what do? If you're a heliocentrist, what do? Well, you use the Lorentz transform equation. Okay. Where you say that the east west um, um, measurement is distorted by the Lorentz transform equation, which was what Lorentz came up with in 1892 to answer the Michelson-Morley experiment. That's all they do. Okay, is just they reapply the transform equation, and they say you're not seeing what this sapphire oscillator is really saying until you use the Lorentz transform, because we already found out in 1887 that we didn't see much difference between the north south and east west directions of the light beams. So but we know the earth is moving. Okay, we know the earth is moving. That's our foundation upon which we base everything else. So if that's the case, then we have to find some excuse for why the east west direction is um, is the same as the north south direction. We have to find out why. The only way we don't know why, but we can apply an equation to it to make it look like we know why. And that's what everybody's going to say. Oh, wow, they got a mathematical equation that they can apply to the non-difference between east to west and north south. What geniuses they are. And they've been applying that Lorentz transform since 1892 until 2022. Okay, so it doesn't make any difference how much more accurate the sapphire oscillator is compared to the Michelson-Morley experiment. The same principles involved, okay, and the same equation to answer the non-discrepancy is applied. So it's the same old game. And the only time this is ever going to change is when they find out that Uncle Albert got it all wrong. And that's not going to be for, you know, decades in the future. They're discovering little by little that Albert's special relativity is getting in the way. It got in the way of inflation. It got in the way of the expanding universe. It's getting in the way. And they're finding out it just doesn't work the way they thought it was going to work. And that day's not going to come until there's a major paradigm shift. So, all right. Um, Question. A while back, you mentioned being interviewed by a Russian newspaper about the conflict over there. I was very interested to read it since we are of the same opinion. Where can I find it? Good question. I was thinking about that the other day. I never heard back from these people. They they took my information and ran, and never heard from him. And I told him to send me a copy, but he never did. So I'm in the dark just like you. All right. See what else we got here. Remy says, how do we respond to pro-abortion people who say, what if the baby is deformed or the mother's health is in danger? Well, the baby's deformed, that's not a reason to kill it. Okay. If the mother's health is in danger, we try to save both. Okay. One's not more important than the other. We try everything we can do to save both. Okay. Um, so we don't kill the mother to save the baby. We don't kill the baby to save the mother. That's not the paradigm that we go by. Okay. All life is precious. And that's where we leave it. How do we respond to atheists who say, why didn't God kill Satan? So the fall would have never happened. So they say this to debunk God's existence. Well, look, because God has to play by the rules too. God doesn't make up the rules as he goes along. The rules were put in place before God created the world and Satan, and God abides by them. Otherwise, God would be a liar. Okay. So God put the rules in place, and the rules dictated what God did, and that way God remains just. And God is God. Okay. It's a lot harder for God than it is for Satan, because God has to always play by the rules and he can never lie. Satan, he can use good, bad, or anything in between to get his plans accomplished because he doesn't care about justice, but not God. Okay. So that's why he didn't kill Satan. Um, all right, next question. A PhD friend of mine placed first in Latin American physics Olympiad when he was an undergrad. He's a conservative Catholic who likes. All right, so you're not asking a question. But okay, but I need help because his objections to geocentrism are way above me. Well, Victor, send them to yours truly, and you can use my email. It's sungenis@aol.com. Okay. And I guarantee you his objections will not be above you when I get done with them. Okay. I don't say that to be proud or haughty or, you know, I just know that as a fact after doing this for 20 years. Um, Remy says, can women be deacons? Because St. Paul appointed Phoebe as a deacon of the church in Romans 16. If you read the Greek, it says diakon. Yes, women can be deacons. It was a practice in the early church. Phoebe was a deacon, as Romans 16, verse 1 and following tells us. Even in 1 Timothy chapter 2 and 3, there's a possibility in Paul's Greek where you had deaconesses as the wives of the deacons. That's certainly possible. Now, the church didn't keep that practice, okay, for one reason or another. But yes, Phoebe was a true deaconess, and it is possible if the church wants to bring that back that she can bring it back. All right, question. What do you say about the statement that it's not about the Jews crucifying Jesus or the Romans crucifying Jesus? It's about all of us who crucified Jesus. Well, here you're conflating two different topics, okay? The one topic is who actually put the nails in Jesus' hands and feet and who made them do it or incited them to do it. And that would be the Jews and the Romans, not you and me. Okay. Now, if you're talking on a soteriological level and you want to know in the universal sense, who was it that eventually led Christ to the cross to pay to appease God for our sins so that we could be saved? Yeah, you and me. Okay, starting with Adam, and you should make that distinction. Okay, it was Adam and Eve who did it, and because they are our federal heads, we are involved in the legal sense because we're part of the human race, and that's why we suffer. But you do have to make the distinction that it wasn't us in the sense that we initiated it, it was Adam and Eve who initiated it. Okay. So you see, there's all kinds of levels to theological discussion here. Then you have to make the proper distinctions in order to answer the questions correctly. Okay. All right. Question. Do you really believe that people in the all right, we already went through that. Thank you, JL. He says, we believe. Thanks for your movies. The Principle, Journey to the Center of the Universe, and Galileo was wrong, and the church was right. Thanks for your hard work. Hard work it was, my friend. Question: did Luther ever regret his doctrine sola fide and sola scriptura? Not that I know of. I know this, however, that it didn't work out the way he thought it was going to work out, in the sense of he didn't realize how divisive this issue can be. What he thought was at the beginning that he could make his legal distinctions about justification that we talked about earlier, and that was all that was going to be. Just the Catholics and their infused grace versus the Protestants and their alien righteousness from Christ. But then he found out that it wasn't that simple, that people began to make distinctions of his theology and saw flaws in it and then tried to improve it. And when they improved it, they changed it. And he saw this right away with his protege, Philip Melanchthon, who took back the very free will that Luther tried to get rid of. So by the time the Formula of Concord was written in 1630 under Melanchthon, they were talking about free will again within a generation of Martin Luther, who didn't want any free will for man. So he didn't regret his interpretations of sola fide and sola scriptura, but he saw that everybody else was changing his doctrine, and he didn't like that at all. So in that sense, he considered his movement a failure. All right. I asked, Holiness of the Bride says, we got 2 minutes to go here. I asked previously that you explain how God sending lying spirits to speak through the mouths of the prophets worked in harmony with God being a God of truth and never lying. Okay, so what is your question? Oh, you answered in terms of God's judgment on sinful man, but not in terms of God being a God of truth. Can you explain in terms of the latter, how God communicating falsehood through these spirits harmonizes with his being unable to lie? No, it's not God that is speaking through the spirit. God allows the spirit to do its bidding. Okay, the spirit is going to lie because that's its nature to lie. God just allows it to happen. Okay, it's not God that's putting the words into the evil spirit. All right. Okay. All right. So I'm going to cut it off here. It's 10 o'clock. Thank you for being here. So be with us next week when E. Michael Jones will be here to talk about his new book, The Dangers of Beauty. And if you could visit robertsungenis.org, leave a donation for us if you could, so we can remain on the air. And if you'd like to be a monthly donor, I would really appreciate that. It just takes a couple clicks on our website, robertsungenis.org, and you are there, and I will love you for it. And a couple of people last week joined up, and I appreciate that. So please consider that. And that is all I have time for. I'm going to go to sleep right away. I'm very tired tonight. So thank you for being here, and look forward to seeing you next week. God bless you. Live the Christian life. Don't sin. Make God